The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and lemon furniture polish, and the man across the desk kept calling my grandfather the deceased, like that was his name. I signed where he pointed. 16 pages, initials here, full signature there. A farm I hadn't visited in 9 years, deeded to a 26-year-old who couldn't keep a houseplant alive. My name is Owen Marsh. At the time I'm telling you about, I was living in a studio apartment in Roanoke, Virginia, tending bar 4 nights a week and pretending I was still figuring out what to do with my life. The truth was quieter and uglier than that. I wasn't figuring anything out. I was just drifting, and I'd gotten comfortable with the current. Grandpa Amos died on a Tuesday in October. Pneumonia, the hospital said, though I suspect stubbornness played a larger role. He was 91. He'd outlived my grandmother by 20 years, my mother by 6, and as far as I knew, every friendship he'd ever had. The funeral was 4 people. Me, the lawyer, a neighbor named Peg Donovan, who brought a casserole and a dish she wanted back, and a pastor who mispronounced our last name twice during the service. The farm was in Patrick County. Deep in the Blue Ridge foothills, 80 acres of overgrown pasture and hardwood forest served by a dirt road that didn't appear on most GPS apps. I drove out the weekend after the signing, not because I wanted to, but because the lawyer said the county would start fining me if I didn't at least secure the structures. There was a main house, a tobacco barn that had been empty for decades, a root cellar, and a machine shed. All of it sagging, all of it mine. I want to be honest about who I was when this started. I was no one special. I didn't have training. I didn't have instincts. I had a pickup truck with a cracked windshield and 2 duffel bags of clothes, and I was driving toward a dead man's land because no one else was left to do it. It was late afternoon when I arrived. The October light was low and copper-colored, the kind that makes everything look like a photograph of itself. I walked through the house first. Grandpa's smell was still there. Pipe tobacco and machine oil and something mineral I'd never identified. His dishes were washed and stacked. His bed was made. His boots were by the door, toes pointed out, as if he'd planned to step back into them. I didn't cry. I want to note that because it matters later. I walked through that house and I cataloged it like an inventory, and I felt almost nothing. And I told myself that was fine. The first night, I slept in the truck. I told myself it was because the house didn't have heat, which was true. But mostly, I just didn't want to sleep in a dead man's bed. In the morning, I drove to the nearest hardware store 40 minutes each way and bought caulk, a space heater, and enough canned food to last a week. My plan, to the extent I had one, was to winterize the house, list the property in the spring, and go back to Roanoke. That plan lasted 3 days. On the 3rd morning, I walked behind the tobacco barn to check the fence line, and my left foot went through the earth up to the knee. Just dropped, like stepping on a manhole cover that wasn't there. I grabbed the fence post and hauled myself out. And when I looked down into the hole my boot had punched through, I saw concrete, not rock, not clay. Poured concrete with a rusted metal frame beneath a layer of topsoil and root mat that had concealed it. I went back to the house, got a shovel, and started digging. It took me 4 hours to uncover the hatch. It was steel, 3 feet square, set flush into a concrete pad that extended at least 6 feet in every direction. The steel was painted in a green I recognized from old military equipment, flat, institutional, the color of compliance. There was a handle recessed into the surface, and beside it, a keyhole. I sat on the ground next to it and stared. 80 acres, and my grandfather had never mentioned this. Not once, in all the years I'd visited as a kid. Not in his will, not in any letter. I tried the handle. Locked. The keyhole was unusual, not a standard pin tumbler. Something older, heavier. I went back to the house and spent 2 hours going through Grandpa Amos's drawers, his closets, the coffee cans of screws and bolts in the machine shed. I found the key in the last place I expected, taped to the back of a framed photograph of my grandmother that hung in the hallway. A brass key, heavy, with no markings. It had been there so long the tape had calcified. The lock resisted, then turned with a sound like a bone cracking. The hatch lifted on hydraulic hinges that still worked smoothly, with a sigh of pressurized air that hit my face cold and stale. Below was a steel ladder descending into blackness. I should have called someone. I should have driven to town, told the sheriff, told anyone. Instead, I got the flashlight from my truck and went down. The ladder dropped 12 feet into a corridor. Concrete walls, concrete floor, low ceiling, maybe 7 feet. The air was cold and motionless and tasted faintly metallic. My flashlight beam was the only light in the world. The corridor ran straight for about 40 feet, then opened into a room. When I found the switch panel on the wall and flipped the first breaker, fluorescent tubes blinked on one by one, buzzing. And I saw what my grandfather had been hiding. It was a government shelter. There was no ambiguity about it. The walls were lined with steel shelving holding supplies in olive drab containers with federal inventory stickers. A water tank dominated one corner, gravity fed from what I later traced to an underground spring. There were cots. There were filing cabinets. There were racks holding equipment I didn't recognize, instruments, sealed cases, a radio console that looked like it belonged in a 1960s submarine. And there were documents. I picked up the first folder from the nearest filing cabinet, and the classification header read, Operation Lazarus, Department of Defense, Eyes Only Clearance Level, Umbra. Beneath that, a date, June 1971. My hands were shaking, and not from the cold. I opened the folder and started reading. I won't reproduce the language. It was dense, clinical, full of acronyms. But the substance was clear enough. In the late 1960s, the Department of Defense had contracted with a private research group called Helion Systems to develop a biological agent for use in post-mortem neural reactivation. The goal, stated plainly in bureaucratic language, was to reanimate dead tissue. Not metaphorically, not as a medical intervention, as a weapons program. The files described test results on animal subjects, dogs, primates, and the results were documented with photographs. I closed the folder before fully processing. My grandfather's name appeared on page 16 of the third document I opened. Amos Marsh, civilian contractor, site maintenance and security. Patrick County Installation, designated Site 112. I was standing in Site 112. I spent 3 hours in that shelter reading files I shouldn't have been reading. The program had been defunded in 1973 after the documents were vague on specifics and uncontrolled manifestation event at a primary research facility in Maryland. The remaining materials were distributed to secondary sites for indefinite secure storage. My grandfather had been paid to maintain this site, to keep its existence secret, and apparently to take that secret to his grave, which he had. I climbed out of the hatch at dusk, and the world looked different. Not changed, revealed. Like I'd been seeing a painting my whole life and someone had turned on a black light and shown me what was underneath. I locked the hatch. I drove to town. I sat in the parking lot of a gas station and watched the news on my phone. That was when I saw the first reports. The reports were scattered and confused, which is how real emergencies always start. Not with sirens and clear warnings, but with noise. a Reddit thread about a riot at a hospital in Memphis, a local news clip from Baton Rouge showing National Guard vehicles on a residential street, a tweet from a nurse in Philadelphia with a photograph too blurry to confirm what it seemed to show. Something was happening, but the word hadn't been said yet, not on any official channel. I sat in that gas station parking lot and felt the two pieces of information collide in my chest, what I'd read in those files, and what I was seeing on my phone. And my body understood before my mind did. My hands went cold. My hearing narrowed to a tunnel. I drove back to the farm. For the next 48 hours, I lived between the house and the shelter, carrying files up into the kitchen and reading them under the overhead light, while refreshing the news on my phone. The reports multiplied. Memphis was under curfew. A second incident in Baton Rouge this time, with video. Shaky, filmed from a rooftop, but unmistakable. People moving wrong, moving after they shouldn't have been moving at all. No one used the word. On the second night, I found a file labeled Site Protocol, Containment Failure. It was a contingency plan written in 1972, outlining what to do if the Lazarus agent was released. The protocol was 12 pages. It described transmission vectors, incubation timelines, behavioral characteristics of reactivated subjects. It described, in calm governmental prose, the end of the world. And then, on the final page, a handwritten note in ink I recognized. My grandfather's handwriting, small, precise, the same hand that had written my birthday cards as a kid. It said, "They didn't destroy it. They moved it. God help us all." I put the page down and pressed my palms flat against the kitchen table, and I breathed. And I made myself think clearly. The shelter existed. The files existed. The outbreak, whether it was connected to Lazarus or some descendant of that program, was real and spreading. I was alone on 80 acres with a hidden government installation that might contain answers or evidence or something that could help or something that could get me killed. The power went out across Patrick County at 11 p.m. on the third night. I went to the porch and looked south. The distant glow of Stewart, the county seat, was gone. Total darkness. The only light was the cold scatter of stars and the blue glow of my phone, which now showed no signal. Standing on that porch, in the silence of a world going dark, I made the first real decision of my life. Not a default, not a drift, a choice. I was going to stay. I moved into the shelter the next morning, not to live in the idea of sealing myself underground, made my skin crawl, but to use. The shelter had what the house didn't: light. From a bank of deep cycle batteries that still held charge, and water from the underground spring. It also had the radio console. It took me a full day to figure out the radio. The equipment was Cold War vintage vacuum tubes, analog dials, a hand-cranked generator as backup. But someone had maintained it. The tubes were clean. The wiring was sound. When I powered it up and turned the dial, I got static across most frequencies. But on one narrow band, 4.715 megahertz, I got a voice. It was a woman, calm, professional, repeating a looped message. "This is Continuity Station 9. Authenticated personnel, respond on this frequency. Civilian listeners, remain in your current shelter position. Do not attempt relocation. This is Continuity Station 9. The message repeated every 90 seconds. I listened to it 14 times before I picked up the microphone. "This is Owen Marsh," I said. "I'm at Site 112, Patrick County, Virginia. I'm a civilian. I found this shelter on my grandfather's property. Can anyone hear me?" Silence, static. The loop resumed. I tried again every hour for the rest of the day. Nothing changed. But on the fourth try, just as I was about to release the microphone, a different voice cut through. Male, younger, stressed. Site 112? That's hold on. A pause. Muffled conversation in the background. Then, Site 112, confirm you have access to the facility. I'm sitting in it, I said. Another pause. Who is Amos Marsh to you? My grandfather. He's dead. The pause this time was longer. When the man spoke again, his voice had changed. Lower, more careful. Mr. Marsh, my name is Lieutenant Dana Cowell. I'm with a Defense Logistics Unit out of Fort Gregg Adams. We've been trying to reach Site 112 for 72 hours. Your site contains materials relevant to our current situation. I need to know exactly what's in that shelter. I looked at the filing cabinets, the sealed cases, the equipment I couldn't identify. You first, I said. Tell me what's happening out there. What Lieutenant Cowell told me over the next 20 minutes confirmed everything the files had suggested and added dimensions I hadn't imagined. The outbreak had gone national. Major cities were falling or fallen. The military was fractured, some units holding defensive positions, others dissolved, others gone dark. The pathogen, whatever it was, reanimated dead tissue within hours of death. The reanimated were not fast, not intelligent, but they didn't stop. They didn't decay at the expected rate. And they were everywhere. We think it's a Lazarus derivative, Cowell said. A modified strain. Someone weaponized the original research and it got out. We don't know who, we don't know how. But the files at your site might contain the foundational data, the original sequences, the vulnerability profiles. Things we could use. Use how? To find a countermeasure. Maybe, if the data's intact. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. 12 feet of earth and concrete above me. The world dying on the other side of it. And a voice on the radio telling me the papers in my dead grandfather's secret bunker might matter. Where are you? I asked. Roughly 200 miles northeast. We're mobile but compromised. It could take us weeks to reach you, if we can reach you at all. He paused. Mr. Marsh, I need you to do something. The console in front of you there should be a sealed panel on the left side, marked with a yellow triangle. Do you see it? I looked. I saw it. Don't open it yet, but that panel contains a transponder. If you activate it, we can lock your position. Other assets might be closer than we are, but once it's on, it broadcasts. Anyone scanning military frequencies will see it. Anyone meaning who? Meaning anyone. I didn't touch the transponder. Not that day, not the next. I told myself I needed to understand what I had before I announced it to the world. The truth was simpler. I was afraid. I spent those days reading files and cataloging the shelter's contents. The sealed cases contained biological samples in cryogenic containers. Still cold, the shelter's cooling system, powered by a geothermal loop I found documented in a maintenance manual, had been running silently for 50 years. There were vials labeled with alphanumeric codes. There were tissue samples sealed in resin. There were notebooks filled with research data in handwriting that wasn't my grandfather's. I understood perhaps a tenth of what I read. I am not a scientist, but I understood enough to grasp the shape of it. The original Lazarus program had identified both the mechanism of reanimation and, potentially, the mechanism to reverse it. The research had been abandoned before the countermeasure was fully developed, but the foundational work was here, frozen, waiting. The decision I was avoiding was not whether to activate the transponder. It was what would happen after. Cowell had been careful with his words, but the implication was clear. If this data was valuable, people would come for it. Military people, with military priorities. And I would become irrelevant, the accidental caretaker, brushed aside while serious people did serious work. Or worse, I'd become a liability, the civilian who knew too much about a classified program that was never supposed to exist. My grandfather had understood this. That's why he'd kept silent. That's why the key was hidden behind my grandmother's photograph, not in a safe, not with instructions, but in a place only family would think to look. He'd wanted someone to find it, but he'd wanted it to be a choice, not an order. On the 5th day, I heard the first sounds from the tree line. It was mid-morning. I was in the yard between the house and the barn, splitting firewood because the shelter's battery bank couldn't run the space heater indefinitely, and the house was the only option for warmth at night. The sound came from the northeast movement in dry leaves, heavy and arrhythmic. I stopped, set down the axe, listened. The figure emerged from the pines about 80 yards out. It had been a man once heavy-set, wearing a torn, high-visibility vest like a road worker's. It moved with the gait the videos had shown, stiff, persistent, head fixed forward. No scanning, no searching, just movement toward stimulus, toward me. I backed slowly toward the house. My only weapon was the axe. I hadn't thought about weapons, hadn't thought about a lot of things. The figure reached the pasture fence and walked into it. Not over it, into it. The wire caught at its waist, and it kept pushing, leaning forward, feet still working, until the fence post groaned, and the wire stretched, and the staples pulled free. It came through and kept walking. Toward me. The same pace, no urgency. I went inside, locked the door, and watched through the kitchen window. It reached the porch. It pressed against the front door. I could hear its weight against the wood, steady, mechanical, not pounding, just pushing. It pushed for 4 hours. Then it stopped, turned, and walked back toward the trees. No reason I could see, no stimulus. It just left. I sat on the kitchen floor with the axe across my knees and my back against the counter. And I understood for the first time, not intellectually, but in my blood, what was happening. This was not a news story. This was not a crisis that would be managed by someone else. This was the world now, and I was in it. That night, I heard more of them in the trees. Not close, but there. Sounds that don't belong to living things. On the 7th day, people arrived, living ones. I was in the shelter, running the radio through frequencies, when I heard an engine on the dirt road. I climbed the ladder and cracked the hatch and saw a mud-caked SUV idling in the yard. 2 people stood beside it. A woman in her 40s with a shotgun held low and professional, and a teenage girl sitting on the SUV's tailgate with a bandaged arm, staring at nothing. I approached with my hands visible. The woman tracked me with her eyes, but didn't raise the gun. "This your place?" she asked. "My grandfather's. He passed. It's mine now." "You alone?" "Yeah." She studied me the way you study a door you're not sure is locked. Then she said, "I'm Carla Briggs. That's my daughter, Nessa. We've been driving for 3 days. Every road south is blocked or burned. We need water and we'll move on." Nessa hadn't looked at me. The bandage on her arm was clean, changed recently, carefully, but I could see the edges of a wound beneath it. Not a bite, a burn. Deliberate, precise. Someone had cauterized something. I gave them water. I gave them food from my dwindling can supply. While Nessa sat in the kitchen eating pears from a can with mechanical steadiness, Carla stood on the porch with me and told me what she'd seen. Carla had been a county sheriff's deputy in Franklin County, one ridge over. When the outbreak reached her jurisdiction, she'd tried to hold the line at the county office. It fell in 6 hours. Her husband, Ray, was bitten during the evacuation. He told Carla to take Nessa and go. She heard the shot behind her as she drove away. She told me this without tears, without a break in her voice. The way you describe a road you've already driven. The grief was there, but it had been packed tight and stowed somewhere she could carry it. "You've got a good position here," she said, scanning the tree line. "Elevation, sight lines, one road in." "I'm not a soldier." Neither was Ray. Didn't matter. Nessa appeared in the doorway behind us. She was 15, slight, with dark eyes that seemed permanently focused on a middle distance. She looked at me and said the first words I'd heard from her. "Your radio. I heard it from the kitchen. Who are you talking to?" I hesitated. Carla caught the hesitation. "What radio?" she said. I could have lied. I could have said it was a weather radio, a CB, anything. But I looked at Carla Briggs, a woman who'd heard her husband's last decision through a car window, and I couldn't add another lie to a world already drowning in them. "There's something under this farm," I said. "I need to show you." Carla stood in the shelter for a long time without speaking. She walked the length of it, opened cabinets, read labels, touched the radio console with 2 fingers like she was checking for a pulse. Nessa sat on one of the cots and pulled her knees up and looked, for the first time since arriving, almost interested. "Your grandfather built this?" Carla asked. "The government built it. My grandfather watched over it." I showed her the files. Not all of them. There were hundreds of pages I still hadn't read myself, but enough. Operation Lazarus, the biological samples, the transponder I hadn't activated, Lieutenant Cowell's request. Carla read faster than I did. Former law enforcement, she knew how to extract information from documents. When she finished the summary file, she set it down precisely and looked at me. "You're sitting on a target," she said. "I know. If you activate that transponder, you'll have visitors. Military, maybe. But maybe not only military. If there are people out there scanning organized people, desperate people, they'll come too. And you've got no perimeter, no defense, no plan. I know that too. So why haven't you turned it on?" I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was layered. Fear, yes, but also something else. Something I was only beginning to articulate. "Because once I do, it's not mine anymore," I said. "The choice, I mean. Right now I can still decide what to do with this. Once the signal goes out, other people decide." Carla leaned against the filing cabinet and crossed her arms. "And what are you deciding?" "Whether the data in those files is worth more than the shelter is worth to us alive." She nodded slowly. Not agreement, acknowledgement. She understood the calculation. "There might be a middle path," she said. "Don't broadcast. Transmit the data itself. The files, the research, digitize it. Read it over the radio. Send it to Cowell's unit and whoever else is listening. You give away the information without giving away the location." It was the first time since the hatch opened that someone had offered me an idea I hadn't already thought of and discarded. Carla's mind worked differently from mine, tactical, lateral, trained to find the option between the options. "The radio's analog," I said. "I can transmit voice. I could read the files, but we're talking about hundreds of pages of technical data. Genetic sequences, chemical formulas. One error and it's useless." "Then we need someone who understands it," she said. "Someone who can identify what matters and transmit only the critical data." We looked at each other across the shelter. 2 people who hadn't known each other 24 hours ago, standing in a dead man's secret, making plans that assumed a future. Nessa's voice came from the cot. The SUV has a CB radio. We can scan for survivors on local frequencies. Someone out there might know this stuff." Carla looked at her daughter. Something shifted in her face, a brief flash of the grief she'd packed away, mixed with something else. Pride, maybe, or fear at watching her child adapt to a world that required this kind of thinking. "She's right," Carla said quietly. "We started scanning that night. It took 3 days to find Marcus Bell. We caught him on a CB frequency, broadcasting from a veterinary clinic in Floyd County, roughly 30 miles west. His voice was ragged and precise, someone used to being exact, even when exhausted. He identified himself as a molecular biologist from Virginia Tech, specializing in viral pathology. He'd been trying to reach the university's biosafety lab when the roads collapsed and had barricaded himself in the clinic with whatever he could find. "I've been trying to reach anyone with institutional resources," he said over the radio. "Every military frequency is either silent or playing the same loop. Do you have laboratory facilities?" "Not exactly," I said, "but I have something else." I described the shelter, the files, the samples. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought we'd lost the signal. Then Marcus said, very carefully, "You're telling me you have original Lazarus series biological samples in viable cryogenic storage?" "I'm telling you I have sealed vials in a cooling unit that's been running since the Nixon administration. I don't know what's viable." "Can you read me the container designations?" I read the alphanumeric codes from 12 vials. I could hear him writing, the scratch of pen on paper faintly audible through the static. 3 of those codes matched known Lazarus reference samples from the literature, the classified literature, which I shouldn't have read but did, because my thesis advisor was indiscreet. A shaky breath. "If those samples are intact, they contain the original unmodified agent. The baseline. Everything circulating now is a mutation or a weaponized derivative. But if you have the parent strain, it's possible to identify the binding mechanism and design something to block it." "Possible," I repeated. "Not certain, not easy, not quick, but possible, which is more than anyone has right now." Carla was standing behind me, arms crossed. She leaned forward and spoke into the microphone. "Dr. Bell, what do you need to get here?" "A vehicle, fuel, and someone to clear the road between here and there. I've been watching from the clinic roof. The infected are concentrated along the main highways. The back roads might be passable, but I can't drive and navigate and handle threats simultaneously. This isn't what I do." The 3 of us looked at each other. Carla, who could shoot. Nessa, who could navigate. Me, who owned the destination. "I'll come get you," Carla said. I started to object. She cut me off with a look. "You stay with the shelter. You stay with the data. Nessa stays with you." She glanced at her daughter. "Do not argue with me." Nessa didn't argue. She looked at her mother with an expression I recognized, the same one I'd worn at the funeral. The face of someone watching a person leave and knowing the return isn't guaranteed. Carla left at dawn in the SUV, the shotgun on the passenger seat, a hand-drawn map from Nessa on the dashboard. I stood at the end of the dirt road and watched the taillights disappear into the trees. Then I went back to the shelter and sat with Nessa in silence that felt enormous. Carla was gone for 41 hours. During those hours, Nessa and I developed a routine that was less about efficiency and more about maintaining the illusion of control. She monitored the CB radio. I read files. We ate together canned food, rationed carefully, and spoke in short exchanges that gradually lengthened as the hours accumulated. On the second evening, Nessa told me about the burn on her arm. They'd been at a checkpoint outside Roanoke. The soldiers there were screening for bites. Anyone with a wound was being held in a fenced area. Nessa had cut her arm on broken glass during the evacuation. Not a bite, a cut. But the soldiers didn't differentiate. Carla had argued. When arguing failed, she'd grabbed Nessa and run. A soldier fired a warning shot. Carla didn't stop. Later, in the car, Carla cauterized the cut with a cigarette lighter. Not to treat infection, but to obscure the wound's shape. To make it look like anything other than a cut that could be mistaken for a bite. She burned me to keep me alive, Nessa said. No emotion in her voice, just the fact. I thought about my grandfather, tending this shelter for 50 years, saying nothing to anyone, carrying a secret that he believed could either save or destroy the people he loved. I thought about the choices people make to protect what they can't bear to lose, and how those choices leave marks sometimes visible, sometimes not. Around midnight, the motion alarm sounded. I'd rigged it that morning, a crude system using fishing line and tin cans strung across the property's most exposed approach, the eastern fence line. The sound was faint from the shelter, but unmistakable. Multiple cans. I told Nessa to stay below and climb the ladder. There were 4 of them coming through the east pasture, moving in a loose cluster, not coordinated but drawn by the same stimulus. Maybe the generator's hum. Maybe the faint light leaking from the house windows. They'd already breached the fence, wire dragging from one figure's waist like a leash. I had the axe. In the dark, from the hatch opening, I watched them approach the house and begin their mechanical pressing against walls, windows, doors. One found the porch steps and climbed them, not smoothly, but with a terrifying patience. It fell twice and resumed climbing both times. They didn't know I was behind the barn. They didn't know the hatch existed. As long as I stayed still, I was invisible. But the house was taking damage. I could hear wood cracking, the groan of a window frame. If they got inside, they'd wreck the supplies I'd staged on the ground floor. The firewood, the water jugs, the tools. I gripped the axe and thought about being a hero. And then I thought about Nessa alone, in the shelter if I got killed. And I lowered the hatch and went back down. "How many?" Nessa asked. 4. She nodded. "We wait." We waited. Above us, the sounds continued for hours, shuffling, pressing, the occasional crash of something breaking. Then, like before, they stopped, moved on, drawn by some other input, some distant sound or vibration that pulled them elsewhere. In the morning, I surveyed the damage. The front door was shattered, a window was broken, the porch railing was torn free. But the structure held. I was boarding the window when I heard the SUV. Carla pulled into the yard with a man in the passenger seat and a look on her face that said the 30 miles had cost her something she wasn't going to describe. Marcus Bell unfolded from the vehicle, tall, thin, early 40s, with academic posture crumbling under physical exhaustion. He carried a single backpack and wore a Virginia Tech sweatshirt stained with things I chose not to examine. Nessa ran from the barn and collided with her mother. Carla held her with one arm. The shotgun was in the other, and I noticed it had fewer shells on the stock carrier than when she'd left. Marcus looked at me. "Mr. Marsh?" "Owen. Owen, show me everything." Marcus didn't sleep for the first 36 hours. He spread the files across every flat surface in the shelter, arranged the vials in an order I didn't understand, and talked to himself in a continuous low murmur that was half scientific terminology and half something closer to prayer. I stayed out of his way. Carla established a security rotation, she and I alternating 4-hour watches from the barn loft, which gave the best view of the property's approaches. Nessa took over radio duty permanently, monitoring both the CB and the military frequency, where Continuity Station 9 still played its loop. On the second day, Marcus came up from the shelter and stood in the yard and stared at the sky like he'd forgotten what it looked like. "The samples are viable," he said. 4 of the 12 vials contain intact parent strain specimens. The documentation is extraordinary. Whoever ran this program was meticulous. Monstrous, but meticulous. "What can you do with it?" He rubbed his face with both hands. "In a proper lab, with proper equipment, I could characterize the binding mechanism in days and begin designing an antagonist compound within weeks. Here, with what I have, nothing. I can identify what matters. I can understand it. But I can't act on it. It's like having the blueprints for a bridge and no materials to build it. So we need a lab. We need the data to reach a lab. Any functioning research facility with BSL-3 capability. That's the priority. Not me getting to a lab, the data getting to one. I'm one person. The data is the irreplaceable element." This distinction mattered, and Marcus made it without self-pity. He was a scientist. He understood the difference between the work and the worker. That evening, we held what I suppose was our first council. The 4 of us, sitting in the shelter, under fluorescent light that turned our skin the color of paper. "Cowell's unit is still out there," I said. "Last contact was 9 days ago. He said they were mobile, compromised, maybe 200 miles out." "Can he receive a data transmission?" Marcus asked. "Voice only on this radio. I could read the data, but you said one error makes it useless." Marcus shook his head. "The critical sequences are too complex for a voice transmission. We'd need digital transfer of file, sent electronically, which this radio cannot do." Carla leaned forward. "What about the transponder? If we bring Cowell's people here, they might have digital communication equipment." "They might," I said. "Or they might have been overrun 2 weeks ago, and the signal brings someone else entirely." Silence. Nessa spoke. She'd been quiet through the entire conversation, sitting on her cot, legs crossed, picking at the edge of her bandage. "There's a radio tower on Pilot Mountain," she said. "I saw it on the way here. Big one broadcast tower, probably for a station. If it has a working transmitter, could you boost the signal? Send data further?" Marcus blinked. "Theoretically. A commercial broadcast tower would have far more power than this console. If we could interface with it, and if someone with the right equipment was listening, we could transmit a modulated data signal over AM, crude, but decodable." "Pilot Mountain is 40 miles north," Carla said. 40 miles through territory we haven't scouted." "Everything's territory we haven't scouted," Nessa said. Another silence. I looked at the vials in their rack, glowing faintly in the fluorescent light. 4 small glass tubes containing the echo of a program my grandfather had guarded for half a century. "There's a third option," I said. "One I've been avoiding." They waited. "We transmit the data publicly, not to Cowell, not to one recipient. To everyone, every frequency, every band, as wide a broadcast as we can manage. If the data reaches even one functioning lab anywhere in the world, it could make a difference. But it also means everyone knows what we have. And some of those people will come to take it." Marcus met my eyes. "The samples themselves are valuable. Irreplaceable, possibly. Transmitting the data doesn't eliminate the need for the physical specimens. Someone would still need these vials." "Then we're back to the same problem," Carla said. "Broadcast or don't. Either way, someone's coming." I leaned back against the cold concrete wall and felt the weight of it, not the earth above me, but the decision. My grandfather had chosen silence. 50 years of silence, and the world ended anyway. Silence hadn't saved anyone. But speech was a door that couldn't be closed. We broadcast, I said, but on our terms. From the tower, not from here. We transmit the data, and then we disappear. Take the samples and go. It wasn't a plan. It was a sketch of a plan, drawn in the dark. But it was the first time all four of us nodded at the same time. Preparation took 5 days. 5 days during which the world contracted around us like a closing fist. The infected were increasing. Not in sudden waves, but in steady accumulation, 2 or 3 appearing at the tree line each day, drawn by our activity. Carla dropped 3 in the east pasture during a daylight probe that got too close to the barn. The sound of the shotgun echoed off the hills and seemed to draw more from the south. We learned to use the axe when we could and save the ammunition for emergencies. I learned what it feels like to swing a blade at something wearing a human face. I will not describe it further. Marcus worked without pause, distilling the critical data into a transmittable package. He recorded himself reading the essential sequences onto a cassette tape he found in the shelter, an analog backup, in case the digital plan failed. His voice on the tape was steady, clinical, almost soothing. The most important data on Earth, narrated like a bedtime story. Carla scouted the first 10 miles of the route to Pilot Mountain using the SUV, returning each evening with maps annotated in red pen. Road conditions, abandoned vehicles, burn zones, infected concentrations. She marked safe passages and dead ends, with the precision of someone who understood that inaccuracy killed. Nessa, meanwhile, did something none of us expected. She went through the shelter's equipment racks, the instruments and sealed cases I'd never opened, and found, beneath a tarpaulin, a field radio set from the 1970s. Portable, battery-powered, designed for exactly the kind of long-range tactical communication we needed. It was built to survive a nuclear war. It had survived 50 years in a bunker. She cleaned it, tested it, and pronounced it functional. "How do you know how to do that?" I asked her. "Ham Radio Club," she said. "8th grade. Mom made me join something extracurricular." Carla, passing through the shelter at that moment, paused. Something in her expression cracked. Just for a moment. The recognition that a parenting decision she'd probably fought about with her daughter had just become a survival advantage. She touched Nessa's shoulder once and kept walking. We planned to leave on the 6th day. The night before, I went through the shelter one last time. I packed the 4 viable sample vials into a padded case Marcus had constructed for medical supplies. I took the cassette tape. I took my grandfather's handwritten note. They didn't destroy it. God help us all. And folded it into my coat pocket. Then I sat in my grandfather's chair in the dark kitchen of the house and spoke to him, silently, the way you speak to someone you failed while they were alive and can only honor now. I told him I was breaking his silence. I told him I understood why he'd kept it. And I believed he'd been right once. The world he lived in could not have handled this knowledge. But the world he lived in was gone. And the world that replaced it needed every weapon it could get. I told him I was sorry, and I meant it. And it wasn't enough. At dawn, we locked the hatch for the last time and drove north. The drive to Pilot Mountain should have taken 45 minutes. It took 11 hours. Carla's scouted route held for the first 15 miles. After that, we entered uncharted territory and found what every survivor finds eventually, the landscape of aftermath. Cars stopped in the middle of roads, doors open, occupants absent. A church with its parking lot full and its doors nailed shut from the outside. A school bus on its side in a ditch, windows dark. Something moving inside it that we did not investigate. Carla drove. I rode shotgun with the axe. Marcus sat in the back with the sample case held between his feet and his eyes closed, lips moving, rehearsing the data broadcast sequence, I realized. Nessa had the field radio on her lap, scanning frequencies, occasionally catching fragments. A child crying, a man reciting scripture, a woman repeating a set of GPS coordinates in Spanish. We detoured around 3 blocked roads and 1 bridge that had been intentionally collapsed. At a crossroads near the base of the mountain, we encountered our first living people since Marcus. There were 6 of them, armed, standing around a pickup truck with a makeshift barricade of furniture and sheet metal blocking the road. The man in front held a deer rifle and raised his palm in a gesture that was not a greeting. Carla stopped the SUV 30 yards out and rolled down the window. "Road's closed," the man called. "We need to get to the broadcast tower on the summit," Carla called back. "Road's closed," the man repeated. His companions shifted. One of them, a woman with a hunting bow, moved to a flanking position with casual practice. These were not bandits. They were people defending a choke point. But the distinction wouldn't matter much if things went wrong. "We have something that could help stop this," I said, leaning across Carla. "Research data. A way to fight the infection. We need the tower to transmit it." The man studied us. His eyes moved from Carla's shotgun to the SUV's cargo to Marcus's sweatshirt. He stepped closer. "Virginia Tech," he said to Marcus. "Department of Molecular Biology. My daughter went there, class of 18, biochemistry." A pause. Something human moved behind his eyes. "She's in the truck." He didn't say whether she was alive. His voice didn't indicate either way. He stepped aside and waved his people back. "Tower's accessible from the fire road on the north face. You'll hit infected on the approach. They cluster around the structures up there. Wind carries sound down, and they follow it back up." Carla nodded. "Thank you." "If your thing works," the man said as we passed, "let us know." I looked back as we drove through the gap. The woman with the bow had already closed the barricade behind us. The man was standing with his hand on the pickup truck's tailgate, near the covered bed where his daughter was. His palm rested flat on the metal, as if he could feel something through it. I turned forward and didn't look back again. The fire road was a nightmare. Rutted, washed out, and steep enough that the SUV's tires spun on loose gravel and red clay. Twice we had to stop and clear fallen branches. Once Carla killed the engine and we sat in silence while a group of 8 infected shuffled across the road 50 yards ahead, moving in their terrible patient procession towards some stimulus we couldn't detect. The broadcast tower came into view as we crested the last switchback. It was tall 300 feet or more, a lattice steel structure with a small concrete building at its base. The tower itself was intact. The building's door hung open. We parked behind the tree line and observed for 20 minutes. 3 infected stood in the clearing near the building, motionless, like unplugged machines, waiting for input. "I'll handle them," Carla said. She was out of the vehicle before I could respond. She crossed the clearing at a measured walk, shotgun up, and put down 2 of them with controlled efficiency I'd stopped being surprised by. The third turned toward the sound and received the axe from me because I'd followed her without deciding to, running on something deeper than thought. The axe connected and the thing dropped, and I stood over it breathing hard, and Carla said, "Not bad," which was the closest thing to a compliment she'd given me. The broadcast building was small, 1 room. dominated by equipment racks and a transmitter console far more powerful than anything in the shelter. The control board was intact. The tower's generator was diesel, and the fuel tank behind the building was half full. When Nessa found the starter switch, the generator coughed and caught, and the lights came on. Marcus went to work immediately. He interfaced the field radio with the broadcast transmitter using cables he'd packed for exactly this purpose. Nessa tuned the system. Carla took position at the door with a view of the clearing. I stood in the middle of the room and watched 3 people who had been strangers 15 days ago perform a coordinated operation with the precision of people who'd trained together for years. They hadn't. They'd been forged into this in real time, under pressure, out of necessity and trust and the absence of any alternative. "We're live," Nessa said. Marcus sat at the console with the cassette player wired into the broadcast system, and the notes from his data compression spread in front of him. He looked at me. "Once I transmit, it's out there," he said. "Everyone with a receiver and the knowledge to decode it gets the roadmap to a countermeasure. And everyone without that knowledge gets confirmation that something valuable is being broadcast from this location." "How long to transmit the full package?" 40 minutes, repeating on a 3-hour loop." "How long can the generator run?" "On what's in the tank? 18 to 20 hours. I did the math. 6 full broadcast cycles. 6 chances for someone, somewhere, to receive and record the data. 6 chances for the right ears to hear it. And 18 hours for the wrong ears to find us. "Start transmitting," I said. "We babysit the first cycle, confirm it's clean, and then we go." Marcus pressed play. His voice filled the room from the speakers, steady, clinical, reading sequences, and binding site analyses and vulnerability profiles in a cadence that sounded almost musical. The broadcast went out into the air, riding radio waves at the speed of light, bouncing off the ionosphere, reaching receivers we would never see belonging to people we would never know. We should have left after the first cycle. That was the plan. But plans are made by people who haven't yet encountered the thing that changes them. Halfway through the second broadcast cycle, Nessa picked up a response on the field radio. A voice? Faint, accented, someone speaking English with what Marcus identified as a Korean inflection. The speaker identified themselves as a researcher at a WHO-affiliated facility and asked for specific clarifications on 2 data points in the transmission. Marcus grabbed the microphone. For 10 minutes, he and the distant voice exchanged technical information with an intensity and speed that made the rest of us invisible. When the exchange ended, Marcus sat back and his hands were trembling. "They have a functioning lab," he said. "BSL-4, intact infrastructure. If they can decode the full transmission, they think they can synthesize an antagonist within months." "Months," Carla said from the doorway. Not dismissively, measuringly. "Months is everything," Marcus said. "Months is the difference between this being the end and this being the worst year in human history. Those are not the same thing." A sound from outside. Carla pivoted. Through the doorway, across the clearing, figures were emerging from the tree line. Not 3 this time, not 4. Dozens. The broadcast signal, amplified through a 300-foot tower, had been ringing across the mountain like a dinner bell. "We go now," Carla said. I grabbed the sample case. Marcus grabbed his notes. Nessa killed the field radio connection but left the broadcast transmitter running on its loop. That was the point. To let it cycle until the fuel ran out. As many repetitions as possible. As many chances. We ran for the SUV. The infected were slow, but the clearing was filling from multiple directions. Carla fired twice to open a path. I swung the axe at a figure that emerged from behind the generator, housing as a woman in a park ranger's uniform. Her face collapsed, her hands still reaching. The axe did its work, and I didn't look at what was left. We piled into the SUV. Carla had the engine running before all the doors were shut. She reversed down the fire road at a speed that would have been suicidal under normal circumstances and was merely terrifying now. Infected stumbled after us, fell behind, disappeared around the curve. The drive back was faster. We knew the route. We didn't stop for the barricade, it was gone. The furniture scattered, the pickup truck empty. I didn't let myself think about what that meant. We didn't go back to the farm. There was nothing left there. We needed the shelter's purpose was fulfilled, its secrets released into the air. Carla drove south, then west, following back roads that Nessa mapped in real time from memory and instinct. At dusk, we pulled over on a ridge overlooking the Piedmont. The valley below was dark, except for scattered fires, some controlled, some not. The sky was clear, and the first stars were appearing. Marcus held the sample case in his lap. 4 vials. The physical proof of what we'd transmitted. Irreplaceable specimens that every surviving institution on Earth would need eventually. Where do we take them? I asked. Wherever there's still someone who can use them, he said. We keep moving until we find that place. Carla checked the fuel gauge. Half a tank. She looked at me in the rearview mirror. You okay? She asked. I thought about it honestly. I thought about the shelter sealed and dark behind us, and my grandfather's empty boots by the door, and the broadcast still cycling on the mountain, and the voice from across the ocean asking questions that meant someone was still trying. I thought about the fact that I had not saved the world. I had only made a noise in the dark and hoped the right person heard it. No, I said, but I'm moving. Carla nodded. That was enough. She put the SUV in gear, and we drove west into the falling dark. The broadcast ran for 19 hours before the generator died. We know this because weeks later, on a crackling shortwave frequency, we picked up in a church basement in Tennessee. A coded message from the WHO-affiliated facility confirmed receipt of the complete data package. They had it, all of it. The work was beginning. I don't know if it will be enough. I don't know if months will pass fast enough, or if the world can hold together long enough for the science to catch up to the dying. I don't know where we'll be when the answer comes, if it comes. What I know is this. My grandfather kept a secret to protect the world from itself. I broke that secret to give the world a chance to survive itself. Both choices cost something that can't be calculated. His cost him 50 years of silence. Mine cost me the only home I had left. The vials ride in their padded case between Marcus's feet. Nessa sleeps in the back seat with her burned arm tucked against her chest. Carla drives with her eyes on the road and her husband's name in the space she never fills with words. And I sit in the passenger seat of a dead man's inheritance, not the farm, not the shelter, but the burden of knowing something the world needs and carrying it forward, mile by mile, into whatever comes next. The signal is out. Someone is listening. That has to be enough. For now, it is.